And we are live. One second. Well, now there's a link set. There's a link you can send out if you want. Anyone on? Nope. All alone. All alone. All right, well, I'll just wait for people to come get on. If you're on, feel free to say hi or something. I want to know who's here. And I don't want to feel lonely. Lonely. All right, 1 second. Let me send out the link. Anyone here? Nope. Well, while we wait for people, what can we do? What can I do? 3 people on. Who's on? Please say hi. I want to know who's on. Who is watching me? Who is on? Is Pastor Terrence one of them? Ashley's on. Hello. Ashley, you're the only one that chatted and replied to me. Thank you. Nathan, be on. And Pastor Terrence, is that a dab emoji? Wait, how do you have a dab emoji? Is that an Android thing? I don't know why I'm asking. We have 2 people on. Nathan, is this the 7th grader Nathan? If you're on, Nathan Yoon, I'm guessing, not the 8th grader Nathan. All right, well, another awkward time of trying to wait until more people get on. Yeah, I don't know. I have nothing to show you right now. Maybe I could find some cool video on YouTube or something, but Joanna's on. Hi, Joanna. Let me show you. What could I show you? I mean, I'm obviously in the youth group room. Everything is exactly how it is when you guys left. And I don't know if you missed this room, but Pastor Terrence and I have been thinking of cleaning it, but it's not clean yet. Q&A. All right, I'll do some Q&A. Expose PT. Give me some questions. I can't expose PT because he has much more on me than I have on him. So I'd rather not expose. I don't want to start that battle. Who's No Face? So true, huh? No. It's, and PT has a clean record, clean state. So I have nothing on him. You guys probably have more on him than I do. Caleb Choi, 7th grader. Hello, Caleb. So we have some junior hires. We have react to BTS Dynamite. What is that? Is that appropriate? I'll look it up. 1 second. Enoch's on. What up, Enoch? All right, let's see this. All right. This is Ashley's idea, by the way, so if you don't like it, blame Ashley. Those are guys, right? He's drinking milk. Oh, that's why you drink milk. Wait, this is K-pop? Where's the K? Where's the Korean? Everything's in English. So that's a guy. Are you telling me that's a dude? They're all dudes? Okay, who knows all of their names? Admit it. Who knows all their names? You know, it's not that bad. All right, what's that guy's name? That's a guy. What's his name? Jimmy. All right. I would keep going, but I got a warning from YouTube saying that this might be copyrighted. So I'm gonna stop it right here. All right. You guys can hear me and see me, right? I didn't get canceled by YouTube. I'm good? All right. Woo, that was a close one. All right, well, that was fun while it lasted. We gonna get what? All right. Here, it's 7:35. We'll get started in. I'll give 5 more minutes for people to kind of trickle in more. Yeah. How about Q&A? You guys can ask me anything. I'll answer completely with 100% honesty. Ask me anything. You have 5 minutes. You won't ever get this time ever again. Well, got no questions. Just waiting. So far we have 11 people. I see Caitlin's on, Rachel's on. Hello, Joanna, Pastor Terrence, Enoch. Nice. All right. Well, we'll get started soon, but I hope you guys are excited for tonight's fuel. I think it's a very interesting one, if anything. Whether you are a Christian or not, I think this is something that you could really share with your friends too, and that you can ask and think about yourself. I think there's a lot of good things here. And hopefully I could explain it clearly and do justice to the questions that arise from today. But we'll get started soon. Let me just wait to see more people get on. Yeah, but I think on the topic of apologetics, this is pretty big. I think this is like one of the first main steps that people have to take before we get into more sides of apologetics. And there's a lot of things I probably won't cover today because we're probably going to cover it in some other fuel topic. So I might just skim over it. But if you are curious about anything I say today and I barely talk about it, feel free to contact or reach out to me or Pastor Terrence, or just wait. I'm pretty sure we're gonna continue on with more interesting topics that you would probably be asking as well. So, yep. So that's what to expect today. All right. So right now we have 10 people, and then if you know anyone that is trying to get, if you know anyone that's not on, and you know that they're not doing anything from our youth group, send them the link. Tell them to get on. Tell them that if no, never mind. I was gonna bribe you guys, but I have nothing to bribe you with. But tell them to get on. It's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be a fun topic. Jesse's on. Hello, Jesse. I know Jesse has been asking me sometime throughout the week to play Fortnite with him and the 8th grader Josh Kim. And I've played like 1 or 2 rounds, and I think I made a deal with them that if they win, I would like buy them something, but they never won. So Jesse, to this day hasn't got anything. But yep. All right. Well, it's 5 minutes have passed, so we'll just get started right now. And if more people will come throughout the way, along the way, feel free to tell more people to get on. Feel free to kind of just take notes throughout the whole thing, because it's going to be a very heavy one. It's going to be pretty dense sometimes, because to give you a quick backstory, Pastor Terrence and I, we met up with the CPC's CPC senior pastor, and we told him that we're doing our Friday nights on apologetics, and he was at first a little shocked, because he's like, "Isn't that a little too hard? Isn't that too philosophical, too difficult for youth students?" And Pastor Terrence and I, we said, our kids are smart, and I know you guys are smart, and I know you guys could understand these things. But I do also recommend that you take notes. I do recommend that if you have questions, and you probably might have questions, feel free to reach out to me or Pastor Terrence. We'll try to explain it better. And if we don't know the answer either, we can try looking for the answer together. But yeah. But I recommend taking notes. I also, another thing, on the description, on the bio of this YouTube live, I think there's also a section where you could ask questions. And throughout the seminar, if you want to ask something but you're a little hesitant, you don't want your name, or you want to be anonymous, feel free to ask on the link below, or you can text it in, I think, as well, and I'll try to answer them together with Pastor Terrence at the end of the seminar. But yeah, so we'll get started. But before we start, let me just open us up with prayer. Please pray along. I don't want to just be the one praying, only one praying. But let me pray for us. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much that we can still gather together and join and listen and learn about how we can defend our faith together, how we can defend and reason what we believe and why we believe. God, I pray that as we discuss about your existence today, Father, I pray that you may truly use this seminar to open our hearts and our minds to really think about the things that are true, that are biblical, that are right about you. So, Father, would you be with us today? During the seminar, during the Zoom discussions afterwards, would you bless this time? bless the people, bless all the students and everyone watching right now. And ultimately, would you be glorified? We love you and we praise your name. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. All right. So today, the question we're answering is, does God exist? How do we know that God exists? And I think this is a question that we've all been wondering. I know this is a question that at some point in your faith or in the future, you will ask this question. You will be a little confused and you might have doubts. And that's not a bad thing, but this is a very important and heavy topic. It's a loaded question. And this question of does God exist? It's a question that's been asked and discussed and challenged since even like thousands of years ago. And I think the early records of this question is we see it in like early Indian societies, like 6th century BC, and they had a religion, but they didn't believe in a God. So they had a religion, but they didn't believe in a God. And for the most part, until the Enlightenment, which is the 17th and 18th century, so a few like 400 years ago, most societies had religions. Most societies and most cultures, most countries, they had religions, and most religions had this notion of a God, that there is a God or many gods that exist. But usually most societies with religions, they believe that there is a God, there is someone higher, there's someone greater that we worship and serve. And yes, and it used to be fairly normal. It used to be very normal to assume that there is a God. And the question back then, it used to be, which God? Which God? Because there's so many gods out there, so many religions and societies that believe in different things. Which one do I choose? Do I worship the Greek gods or the Norse gods? Or do I worship different gods? Even within one religion, there's so many gods. Which one do I choose? And can I just worship all of them? And that used to be the question for most of history. But at the Enlightenment, people started society started advancing more in science and technology and reason. And other factors kind of shifted our worldviews. Instead of asking which God, we started asking, is there even a God? Is there a God? And it's a common thought, I think, common misconception, if anything, that people today, we tend to think that religion, it's for more primitive and superstitious societies. It's for poorer and less educated people. I think we tend to think that once a society has more scientific and technological advances and growth, then people start realizing that, hey, we don't need God. There is no God. We figured it out ourselves. But this kind of thinking is actually very false. It's actually not true. Definitely when people start getting comfortable and self-autonomous, they start to depend on themselves and they abandon God. Like, sure, that does happen. And it even happens amongst Christians, and we call that being a nominal Christian. But we also see, for example, South Korea, our many of our homeland, South Korea, it actually, during the time of rapid economic and technological growth in the past 60 years, this is not that long ago, 60 years, they grew so much technologically, scientifically, and education, and their economy, they just blew up. But also, at that exact same time, Christianity grew and blew up in Korea at the same time. So I think it's the wrong type of thinking, saying that once you get more scientific, you get less religious. But actually, in many cases, we see that religion actually pushes, and religion actually encourages and strengthens science and economy and societies. And then we even see that, we kind of saw that even in our country, in America. But right now, we live in an age where the existence of God it's not assumed anymore. It's not assumed but it's instead, this notion is actually questioned and challenged. Most secular people, they don't assume that God exists. Instead, it's the question of, is there even a God? So with that said, I said before that our key verse for apologetics 2 weeks ago, I said that, actually, does anyone know what it is? The key verse for apologetics, why we do apologetics. Does anyone remember what that is? If you have your notes, or if you really remember what I talked about. The key verse, it's actually, no one replied yet, so I'm gonna just say it. It's 1 Peter chapter 3:15. It says that we need to have a defense for what we believe in. And we have to have a defense for this question as well. Does God exist? Does God exist? And because the Bible, it actually assumes that God exists from the very beginning. It starts with God, it ends with God. The whole scripture is about the Bible, and it just assumes that God exists. I think this question of does God exist, it has to be more philosophical than biblical. I'm not saying it's not biblical at all, but I'm saying we use a lot of philosophy and reason to answer this question. And the Bible just proves, and the Bible just assures everything that we believe in. So why I'm saying this is I'm pretty much saying we can't prove, neither can we disprove that God exists, but at least when we have good reasoning and good defenses, it'll get people that don't believe thinking a little bit. People that are skeptical about God, it'll have them wonder a little bit, and that's the main goal. And hopefully God uses our reasoning to bring people to himself. So what is the goal? Oh yeah, so here's the questionnaire. If you want to ask questions throughout the seminar, please feel free to send in some questions. But yeah, the goal for today, can you read that? Is that legible? I don't know if it's too small or blurry. All right, I'm getting the thumbs up. So the goal for today, 3 things. First thing, let me just briefly go over why do people believe what they believe, and then we're gonna go to arguments against God and the arguments for God. So we'll start with the first. Why do people believe what we believe? So the first, why do you believe? First thing, first reason why many people believe, and I think it usually starts here for many of us, it's the social and cultural reasons. There's social and cultural reasons. Let me explain what that is. It means that many of us probably listening, especially at CPC Youth Group, you grew up in an environment or a culture or a society, a community that believes in God, or the other way around. You grew up in an environment that don't believe in God. And the community or the culture where you grew up, it influences your development of beliefs, right? If you grew up in a Christian family, you'll probably grow up in a church, and you'll probably grow up as a Christian more likely than not. Or the other way around. If you grew up in a non-believing family, you'll probably grow up without church, without any system of God in your worldviews. And it goes even further. It's not just families, but even cultures or regions. If you grew up in Pakistan, you'll probably grow up Islamic. If you grew up in Cambodia, you'll probably grow up Buddhist. And these are social and cultural reasons. This is just what you've been surrounded with, and it's just how you've been raised. And many times, a lot of what we believe, a lot of what we come to believing in God or not believing in God, it's because of how we grew up and how we were raised and what we were surrounded with. So that's the first reason. And I think many of you guys too could say that you guys mainly came to Christianity because of social and cultural reasons, where your families brought you, or people around you were just happened to be Christians. So I think that's one of the big reasons why people believe what they believe, whether you believe in God or not. Second reason, I think, or this is a pretty big one, this might be the most important one, you have personal reasons. You had, for example, maybe you had a spiritual experience, right, at a retreat or something, and you felt like God was tugging at your heart, and you were assured that he's real. That could be a personal reason. Maybe the other way around, you had a bad experience from Christians or religious people or at church, so you have a negative impression of believing in God. Or maybe you have no experience of God at all. and everyone could react differently. You could be afflicted with something very painful or hard in your life. Maybe you go through heartbreak or sickness, and you can go either one of two ways, and I've seen both happen. You can either turn to God for help and comfort, saying, God, I need you to get through this. I think a good example is when you're, I don't know if you guys have been in a have been on a plane or anything, but during like pretty crazy turbulence, I've experienced wild turbulence once where I actually felt like we're going to crash. Most people, even if they believe in God or not, they're going to start praying, God, help me through this. So that could be one response. But you can go the other way, and you can also say that a loving God, a loving and all-powerful God, he can't let this happen to me. There must be no God. Or another example, you could get very successful, and you can react by saying, I did pretty well myself. I don't need God. God didn't help me. I did this. Or you might go the other way and say, all the success, being at the top, it feels pretty empty. There must be something greater out there than success. See, everyone has a personal reason for why you believe God. And I think this is usually the time for many of you where you're not just following Christianity. You're not just a Christian for social and cultural reasons because your family's telling you to, but maybe right now is the point where you're starting to ask questions for yourself. You're trying to experience God and know God for yourself. So the personal reasons, this is one good reason. A third reason, intellectual reasons. And I think that's why we're doing what we're doing today, intellectual reasons. Whatever you believe, I think if you really care about it, you'll try to make more sense of it. You'll try to think about it more. You'll even question it and get answers for it. You'll defend it. You'll challenge it. You'll strengthen it. And usually you'll try to reason for what you believe and what you stand for. You think about it. And maybe if you believe in God, you say, hey, believing in God makes more sense than having no God. Or you might go the other way around and say, hey, I can't see any proof of God. He must not exist. But a lot of people, I think Pastor Terrence mentioned this last week and 2 weeks ago as well. A lot of people don't become a Christian because someone gave them good arguments and then they were convinced. But I think having reasons strengthens what you believe, whether you believe or not, whether you think God is real. You can intellectually reason that. Whether you believe God is not real, you can intellectually find reasons for that too. And there are cases where some people actually did one or the other based on pure intellect, based on just reason. I think a good example, anyone know who that guy is? Probably not, huh? He wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. His name's C.S. Lewis. Pretty famous author, not just Christian author, but worldwide, international. He's great writer. And his conversion story actually happened. It was sort of an intellectual conversion where he just read and listened to a lot of smart Christians, and he thought about it and it just made more sense. And he's like, you know what? God makes more sense. I'm gonna follow God. But that's one example. The other example, and I think this might be more common. Do you know who that is? He passed away not too long ago either. I think he's a genius. His name's Stephen Hawking. He's an expert in like physics and quantum mechanics. He's a genius. But he doesn't believe in God because of intellectual reasons. And he says, quote, there's no possibility of God's existence because time didn't exist before the Big Bang. That's why he doesn't believe. He says God doesn't exist because time didn't exist before the Big Bang. So he goes all scientific, he goes intellectual. So these are intellectual reasons that you either believe or you don't believe. And usually I think many of us, we go through these reasons in these steps. I think we start, or at least for our context, I think we start with the social and cultural belief of God during our more younger elementary years. Maybe I know for seventh graders, you just came up from elementary department, and maybe you believe in God and you come to church just because your parents brought you to church and all your friends are at church. Um, but then hopefully, I think during junior high and high school, it starts becoming more of a you start having personal reasons. And I think that's Pastor Terrence and I, we really want to make that clear. That's what we're trying to do. Have you, to encourage you to have this personal, intimate relationship with God, not just your parents' God, but your God. And then hopefully, as you towards the end of high school and as you go into college and furthermore, you start to develop more intellectual reasons. You start to think about it and you start to see that this makes more sense. So, see, these are the three reasons why people usually believe or not believe in God. And before we move on, I want you guys to ask yourselves this. What are some reasons why you personally believe or doubt God? And you don't have to answer this right now, but I want you guys to think about this. I want you guys to even write this question down and think about it, write down your answers. And we'll talk about this question and your answers during our Zoom discussion afterwards. But yeah, just here's the discussion question that you can think about right now. But those are the reasons why people believe or not believe in God. So let's play devil's advocate first. Let's start with reasons against God's existence first. Reasons against God's existence. And this doesn't cover all the arguments that people have for why God doesn't exist, but I think these are the main reasons that you'll probably hear, and I think you need to be aware of it and be able to reason for yourself. So the first one is called the argument of contradiction. The argument of contradiction, why God doesn't exist. And pretty much this argument says that the idea of God and religion, they contradict each other. It's inconsistent. And where they're coming from is they're saying that if there is a God, then how come it seems like no one's really agreeing on who God is? Like, if there is a God, why are there so many different religions? And many of them are inconsistent, not just with each other, but amongst themselves. And even amongst people that do believe in God, you see so much debating. Even amongst just narrowing it down to Christians, people are debating and having their own views. And it seems like it contradicts each other. And furthermore, they ask the question, why are there so many, even like religious texts? Like us Christians, we have the Bible, but the Muslims, they have the Quran. The Jews, they have the Talmud. It just goes on and on. Why are there so many religious texts? And just for the sake of this argument, let me go even more specific. That even within each of these religions, there seems like there's contradictions. And specifically, let's talk about our context. Our Bibles. If you actually open up to Matthew chapter 28, verse 2, and compare side by side with Luke 24, verse 4. So these are the two passages. They're both talking about when Mary visited Jesus's tomb on Sunday after he was crucified, days after he was crucified. And in these passages, in these accounts, you see that in Matthew over here, it says there's only one angel. There's one angel that appeared to them. But if you read Luke's version, it says that there were two angels. So what is it? One angel or two angels? And people say that's inconsistent. It contradicts each other. The Bible is flawed. But I think this argument of contradiction, and I think many of the other arguments for the reasons against God, I think they come from a lack of biblical understanding and maybe even ignorance. It's like, for example, it's like people that when you talk about the Bible stance against homosexuality, and then people respond by saying they throw at you some Leviticus texts Levitical laws saying like, oh, if you follow the Bible on that, then why don't you stop eating pork? Why don't you stone your kids if they don't obey you? Stuff like that. And it's like they just looked that verse up on Google and they don't really know what it's talking about. And a lot of those arguments come from ignorance and a lack of biblical understanding. And on the flip side, I think that's why it's so important that us as Christians, we really need to know what we're talking about. We really need to be able to support the Bible and what the Bible is talking about. So let me clarify what's going on here. Why does it seem like there's all this contradiction? See, the purpose of this story, of this passage, the purpose of why Matthew and Luke wrote this event and shared it is not to show you exactly who was in the tomb. Their goal wasn't to explain like every single detail of what was going on. See, their goal wasn't to show you everyone that was in the tomb, but their goal was to share, their main goal and their primary goal was to share who wasn't in the tomb. And Jesus was gone. Jesus wasn't in the tomb, even though he was just crucified a few days ago. And that's what they're trying to tell you. And when you tell a story, let me ask you, do you go specific to all the numbers and the details of the event? When you tell people a funny story or something that happened, are you like mentioning every single thing, like the air quality and the temperature of the room? No, usually you're just sharing the main details of what you're trying to share, right? You're just sharing the main purpose of the event, of what you're sharing. Like imagine if I asked one of you, like, how was your summer? How was your summer? And then one of you replied, like, oh, my blood pressure was 90/60. My heartbeat was 75 beats per minute, and my oxygen levels they're okay. My BMI is 20.4. My body temperature is a little high because of the summer heat. And then I'd just be standing there like, okay, man, it's a little weird. I'm not your doctor. See, when I ask you guys how your summers went, usually you guys say, oh, it was okay. Or it was really boring. It's hot. Because that's what I was asking. And that's what you're communicating. You don't go so detailed. And I think when people try to look for details instead of the main event of the story, then they can say anything about anything. And like I mentioned in our past Sunday service, for the Bible, you have to know what the story is about, or else it might not even make sense. And we'll talk about this later in a different fuel about why the Bible is reliable, but I'm just going to leave it at that. So yeah, the first thing, argument of contradiction. Second, I think this might be the most common one. This is the one that everyone will bring up eventually, the problem of evil. And if you ever get into a debate or a conversation with your non-believing friends, they probably might go to this. This is the go-to argument against God's existence, the problem of evil. And I won't go too much into detail because I think this is such a big topic that it has to be a separate seminar. But just to kind of give a brief overview, this argument pretty much says, if God is all good, if God is all powerful, then why is there so much evil and suffering in the world? Doesn't that mean that God isn't all powerful if he can't stop evil? Or on the other hand, if he can stop evil, doesn't that mean he's not all good if he doesn't stop evil when he can? And I think this question, even Christians ask, it stumps us because we do see the brokenness and the evil in this world and we think, what is going on? This isn't normal. This isn't right. Why can't God just stop this? And let me just respond quickly. We'll go deeper into this on a separate night, but let me just quickly respond just so that I don't leave you too curious. But my quick response to this is, God is all knowing. God is all powerful. He is all good, but he's also all knowing. He's all knowing. And in his infinite wisdom, he allows certain things to happen that we don't understand. And I know that seems like a cop-out answer, like, oh, it's a mystery. But you have to think, if there is a God who really created the entire world and really is just, he transcends, like what Josh said, he does transcend the dimension of time. He's beyond our imagination. why should we think and relate to God on our terms, on our reasoning? God has come down to us to reason on our terms so that we can understand. That's why we have the Bible, so that we're not just left with nothing, and that he can communicate with us. But he doesn't have to communicate everything with us. And even if he does, maybe we won't understand, because he's far too wise and intelligent beyond ourselves, beyond humanity. But the answer is ultimately, God will, and he has, judge and cleanse all evil from the face of the earth. He will clean and just solve evil once and for all. So the question of the problem of evil is, why is evil happening now? But we as Christians, we know that evil will not be permanent. And I think that somewhat answers that question, that God will eliminate evil, but we have to trust and we have to hope in his timing and his methods, because his timing and his methods are better than ours. So that's the problem of evil. I went that pretty quick. It's really a really big topic, so I can't go through that completely. But I hope that's enough for today, at least. The third reason against God's existence, it has a silly name. It's called the ultimate Boeing 747 gambit. It sounds kind of nerdy and geeky. The ultimate Boeing 747 gambit. Let me explain why they call it that. So a lot of people that believe in God, they made this argument that God created the earth. You could see it. It's not just an accident. And they gave this silly example. I mean, I think it's a fair example, but they gave this example. I put in like a comic here, but they gave this example that, if there's an infinite tornado in a junkyard, infinite tornado happening in a junkyard, eventually, like, all the pieces will just happen to mash up together and end up as a Boeing airplane, an aircraft that fully function. And basically what the Christians, or even just the believers of God, they were saying that that's very unlikely to happen. That probably won't happen, if anything. And then people kind of took that argument and went against it. And they call it the ultimate Boeing 747 gambit, because they're saying that if everything has an origin and a creator, and that origin and creator is God, then what is the origin of God? That's the question. Who created God? What happened before God? And they're saying that, Boeing 747, like, someone created that plane, but who created the person that created that plane? And it just goes on and on. And I think it is a fair argument, but I think that this argument it assumes that God is within our universe. It assumes that God plays under the same laws of physics and philosophy and reason. And we know, we Christians know that God invented the laws of physics. God created philosophy and reason. So he doesn't have to play by those rules. I think we see that, for example, in Jesus walking on water. That's physically impossible, but Jesus defies the laws of physics because he's God and he transcends the laws of physics. And we can't assume that God plays within our laws and our universe, but that God transcends the universe and that God is greater than that. And he doesn't have to have a creator, because he invented time too. He created time. So even our concept of like beginning doesn't exist with God. God has no beginning. He has no end. And I think once you understand the Bible correctly and fully, that starts to make more sense. And of course, a lot of that, a big part of that is we have to have faith, and there's a big mystery to it. But I think it is very reasonable to say that God is beyond our understanding. And yeah, but that's another big argument that people have against God. They say, who created God? If something created the world, who created that something? And I don't know, maybe your friends might say this too. But that's the third argument. Fourth argument, I think this is a more emotional aspect to it. It's a more personal feeling rather than logic. but I think it is valid. Fourth reason against God's existence, people would say, religion does more damage than good. Religion does more damage than good. And I think people always bring up the Crusades and the Holy War, even back in the days where people would people would hunt and execute and burn witches because they didn't agree. They practiced witchcraft and didn't agree with their religion. Another example. This is true, but it's saddening. But it is true. Is a lot of Christians have used the Bible to promote slavery, because the Bible does talk about slaves, and they use that saying that, like, hey, the Bible talks about it, it must be okay. And that caused more problems. Some might even say that 9/11 happened because of radical religion of an Islamic group. More example is people not getting treated for illnesses and going to like a faith healer instead, and then they just end up more sick than they could have been if they just went to hospital instead. And you see, there's like many reasons people bring up, like, religion is damaging than it is good. And pretty much what people say is we need to get rid of religion. We need to get rid of it. It's harming society more than it's healing it. So let's just trust facts and science. Let's just forget this religious stuff. But I think people that argue this way, they neglect the fact that religion, and even especially Christianity, it has done a lot of good. A lot of good has happened from religion and Christianity. And some might even argue that our country, even, it wouldn't have existed or survived without its Christian influence. And even countering the slavery thing too, a lot of Christians actually use the Bible to speak against slavery, and a lot of the abolish. Why can't I say it? Oh my gosh, Wow, oh my gosh, you guys know what I'm talking about though. But a lot of them, they had biblical and moral convictions for why they went against slavery. So that's biblical. People generally, when they argue this way, they don't talk about all the good that Christianity and religion has done, but they talk about all the hurt. But I think these are the main reasons that people argue against God's existence, against religion, against worship of God. But let me offer some reasons for God's existence, and I think these are more convincing and more valid and more reasonable. And of course, I'm saying that because I'm a pastor and I'm studying this, and I'm on the side of Christianity. But I think even for myself personally, these reasons make more sense. Like, trying not to be biased, these reasons I think make more sense. So let's start with the first, reasons for God's existence. Actually, before we get there, let me ask the question: what arguments against God's existence have you heard for yourselves, or have you asked yourselves? So I want you guys to think about this, write it down as well. We're going to talk about it in our Zoom discussions, but think about what arguments for God against God's existence have you asked yourself? Have you heard from others, your friends, maybe online, whatever it might be? Cool. All right. So reasons for God's existence. We'll start with the first one. The transcendental argument. That's a big word. Transcendental argument. And Josh mentioned in the chat that God transcends the dimension of time. And this is the same word. It's a transcending argument. And pretty much what this argument says is that our use of logic and our belief in morals, it presupposes that God exists. It assumes that God exists. Because think about it. Why does logic make sense? Why does logic make sense? Why does morality make sense if God didn't exist? It didn't exist. You know, things like reasoning and morality, there's no scale, right? If there was no God, there's no scale. But these are things that it has to have some sort of standard, some sort of baseline. And the question is, who creates or who sets that standard? Why should I be a moral person? Why should I even think that there is such a thing called right reasoning, thinking logically, if there is no source of reason, source of logic, and source of morality and morals? So, for example, let's talk about current issues. Let me talk about a current issue. You guys all know this. I see most of you guys, I see a lot of you guys posted too. Racism. Racism. Now, this is a rhetorical question, but do you guys think that racism is bad? Do you guys think that racism is evil? Why? Why do you think that racism is bad? Because of course there's an aspect of self-concern. Like, we don't want to be discriminated against because of our race. So we don't want racism to happen. But can you, if without God in the picture, how can you say that it's evil in its core? How could you say that racism is evil? See, if there's no God, think about it. If there's no God, you would have to make a bunch of reasons and arguments for why we should be moral people, why we should be good citizens, why we should help each other out, why we should donate to charity. Because if reasoning and morality and love and even arts like music, if those things are nothing more than just evolutionary instincts, if they're just chemical reactions in our brain, then really we have no right to say that something is evil or good, because there is no basis of evil or good. See, when we take God out the picture, our morality and all these things, it just becomes a question of what's helpful or harmful, but not good or evil. But we know that evil exists, and when we think of it as just helpful or harmful, then these convictions, they'll change over time. They'll change depending on culture. Who is right? I know some Eastern Asian countries, they eat dog meat. And many of us here in Western countries and here in America, we say that's animal cruelty. That's wrong. But who's to say that's wrong? Is it really wrong? Because we eat cows and pigs and other stuff. Why is eating dogs wrong? But maybe because us in our American culture, we have a emotional attachment to dogs. So we don't want to see dogs get eaten. But other countries, they're just animals, just like cats. I mean, not cats. They're just farm animals like cows or pigs or chicken. Like, there's no real difference. And if that's an example of morality being fluid, if it just changes depending on culture or depending on the times. And who's to say that racism, that if that's true, then that means at one point maybe racism wasn't bad. If everyone thought racism wasn't bad, then does that make it not bad? Does that make it not evil? No. Racism is evil, regardless of the culture, regardless of what people thought about it. And if we don't have God in the picture, it's hard to argue for why we should be moral people. It's hard to argue for why there is such thing as good and evil, and that we can label something good or evil. Now, just to be clear, I'm not saying that you have to believe in God to be a moral person. You don't have to believe in God to be moral. Honestly, there are some nicer and kinder atheists than Christians out there. I've met so many nice, charitable people that do not believe in God, and I've met so many mean Christians, people that do believe in God. So I'm not saying that believing in God makes you a more moral person, although generally that just tends to be true. But I am saying that God makes sense of morality. Morality, reason, that's the transcendental argument, that these things only make sense, and these things presuppose and assume that there is someone greater that sets the standard. So that's the transcendental argument. The second argument, and I'll go through it real quick because I'm going a little long, it's called the teleological argument. And that's another big word. Sorry, I'm getting kind of nerdy here. But teleological argument, a simple way of saying this is called the argument from design. The argument from design. And this says that the world has a very specific and even beautiful design, right? That everything is exactly where it should be to function and sustain life. The solar system, the ecosystem, the immune system, everything, all of these things, it's too specific to be an accident. It's too specific. It cannot be an accident. In fact, even the Bible in Romans chapter 120, I put it up right here. It says that the entire world, it displays God's creation. And because it does display God's creation, people have no excuse to not believe in God. People do not have excuse. So when you look at a beautiful painting or a well-crafted watch or something, you know that someone drew this. Someone made this. They were very precise and very talented and creative. Now, if you look out into the world, and lately the sky has been so beautiful. It's been so hot these days, but the sky, at least, I see so many people posting about the sky because it's so beautiful out there. How can you not say the same about the world? When you look at the sky, how could you just say this is an accident? How could you just say that there is no one, there is no artist, there is no creator who designed this world in this way? And more than just natures, more than just sunsets in nature, even people, and not just our cultural definition of beauty, but people made in God's image. How could we say that people have value? And how could we say that people are inherently beautiful if no one designed us to be this way? If this was all an accident, we can't. But we do see and we do know that the world has a design, and it's beautiful, and it's specific, and it's precise. And this argument says that there has to be a creator. There has to be a designer. Someone who created this into being. Oh, yeah. That's not Genesis 1, by the way. That's not accurate, but gives you an idea, a sense of God drawing and creating the world. Third argument, the ontological argument. All right. Oh my gosh. This one's a bit philosophical. This one, it requires a lot of like 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of reasoning. Like one, therefore, if this, therefore this, if this, therefore that. It's really philosophical, but let me try to make it fairly simple because this is actually a huge argument that we can use as Christians. It was developed and coined by Anselm in this 11th century. So this was 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago. It stood the test of time. Because people, philosophers, theologians, non-Christians, atheists, they're still trying to break this code. They're still trying to disprove this argument, but they can't. So I think it's important to mention it. So pretty much the ontological argument, it says that anything in reality, anything that's real, it's greater than anything in the mind or anything that's imagination. So anything in reality is greater than anything in the mind. So let me give you an example to make it clearer for you guys. Who that? My boy Clark, Superman. He has all these superpowers. He has X-ray vision, heat vision, ice breath, super strength. He can fly. He can super speed. All of that. But guess what? You guys know this. He ain't real. He's not real. So in this ontological argument, my hydro flask, this cup, it's greater than Superman. This is greater than Superman because this is real. This is real. He's fiction. This is real. I can touch it. I can feel it. I can drink out of it. Let me give you another example for you weebs out there. Who that? That's not David Teacher. That's One Punch Man, Saitama. I don't know if you know anything about this anime. I don't really watch it either, but I have seen a couple scenes. This guy, he's known to be pretty much undefeatable, invincible. He never struggled in a fight. I think that's his problem. Like, he wants to have a fair fight, but he just can't because he just beats everyone with one punch. He's super strong. He's like like crazy, stupid strong. But same thing again. He's not real. He's not real. But you know who's real? Pastor Terrence is real. Pastor Terrence is real. So in a sense, in this ontological argument, Pastor Terrence is greater than One Punch Man. Tell him that. Tell him that today. He's going to love it. Pastor Terrence is greater than One Punch Man because Pastor Terrence is real. Now, this argument, let me go back. This argument, the ontological argument, is pretty much saying that being in the reality is greater than being in the thought, in the mind, imagination. So going on with that logic, the concept of God, right? The concept of God is essentially God is the greatest being, right? God is the greatest being. God, by definition, he is the greatest. And there's nothing else greater than God, right? And if reality is greater than imagination, and there's nothing greater than God, then God must be in reality. Does that make sense? If reality is greater than our thoughts, our imagination, and there's nothing greater than God, the concept of God as the greatest being, then God must be in reality. God must be real. And he's not just like Superman, where he's just like a super strong guy, an OP guy. But he's real. He has to be real because you can't think of something that's the greatest thing unless it exists. And I know that's super philosophical. Maybe some people explain it better than I have. But I want you guys to look this up. And I know I'm running out of time. Because I'm running out of time, there's also so many other arguments for the existence of God. And this is just like the main ones. There's so much more. But I'm not going to go through all of these because for the sake of time, and I think it's just too much. But if you are curious, I do want you guys to write these down and look up for yourself. I think there are good videos and good articles. Even Wikipedia might help explaining these arguments and why God exists. And I think they're all very good. And I think they all make me more confident and assured that God exists. And if you're really curious and you want to learn more, feel free to ask me or Pastor Terrence afterwards, and we'll give you more resources. We'll also try to answer more of your questions that you might have. But yeah, these are all the reasons for God's existence. And Psalm 14:1, it says that the fool says in his heart, there is no God. And elsewhere in the Proverbs, it says that fear of God is the beginning of wisdom and the beginning of knowledge. And one last thing I do want to say is that I think all of these arguments, these are helpful for skeptics. But I don't think you have to know these to become a Christian. But I think these do help the people that are unsure with doubts to have some sense of certainty and reason to believe. And maybe even for those of you Christians that do doubt God's existence, this might help. So please look into these. This doesn't really prove God, but we showed you that you can't disprove God either. And I think for me personally, the biggest proof for not just God, but Christianity as a whole, for our God, for the God of our Bible, I think the biggest proof is Jesus. And that's a separate fuel for another time. But while many of these major religions, they're mainly about one person who heard from God, and they're just sharing to other people what God said to him. But Christianity is so different because Christianity is about one God coming down and showing us himself. And there are plenty of witnesses and plenty of evidence for Jesus walking here on this earth and dying and resurrecting. And this is true as a fact, and I hope it is true for you personally as well. And I don't know if you know the mathematician Pascal. He developed this thing called the Pascal triangle. I think you learned that in geometry, but he argued, or he made this thing called the Pascal's wager. I want you guys to look that up too. But Pascal's wager, he's pretty much saying that it could be either or. God could exist or God couldn't exist. It could be either or. We can't prove one. We can't disprove the other. So it's one or the other. But the loss for one of them is much greater than the other. The loss for not believing in God is much greater than believing in God. Because if you believe in God, the worst thing that happens is you just spent too much time at church and you spent time reading this Bible, and you could have done something else, enjoying your life. And honestly, as a Christian, I think we could genuinely say that we enjoy being at church. We enjoy worshiping. We enjoy reading our Bibles. So in a sense, it's a win-win. Even if God doesn't exist, it still satisfies us and gives us a sense of purpose, which I think is a pretty big win. Worst case scenario, if God didn't exist and if you believed in God. But the worst case scenario for if God did exist and you didn't believe in God, I think it's so much worse. Because that means there is an afterlife. That means you lived your entire life not fulfilling your purpose as you were created and designed to be. And that means that you will spend eternity in judgment because you did not follow your creator. Because you were the fool that said in your heart, there is no God. So even in a very shallow sense, the Pascal's wager, the price of God being real, and the price of God not being real is just too risky. The price is too high, and I think it's just logically and practically, even if selfishly, it's more reasonable to believe in a God and to live as if God does exist. But that's all I have for today. Q&A, I'll give like five minutes for Q&A. Yeah, you guys can text in your questions or send it in. So far, I did not get anything. And if you don't have, I got a question in the chat. Oh, that's not a question. Thank you, Josh. Thank you. Yes. Well, while I wait for more questions, if you guys have any, last week during the Q&A time, someone asked a question, but I don't think we really got a chance to answer it. So I'll answer that for now. So the question was, this person asked this. This was a question that bothered me for a bit, but people say Christians are all conservatives or on the right side of politics. Is that true? Is that true? And I think the answer to that is as I think as a pastor, it's just unwise to promote a certain political party or a certain political candidate. I think there's a reason why our Constitution has a separation between the church and the state. And that was something that both non-Christians and Christians agreed on as they were, as the founding fathers set the rules for our country. And I think there's a reason for that. But I do say that Christianity and the Bible and the gospel, it challenges both aspects of the political spectrum. That it does, that Christianity, there are some aspects of the conservative right side that we would agree with, but there are also some aspects of the left side and the liberal side that we would agree with as well. But both sides, we have criticisms, and we have to be wise and discerning on which side would be more beneficial for our country as a whole. And I think it's unfair to say that a certain vote is the Christian vote, or a certain candidate is the Christian candidate, unless they are like super biblical about everything, which usually they're not. And if they are, they don't get voted up. I think there's no right political spectrum for the Christian. I think a Christian would accept the good from both sides and would also challenge biblically on both sides. And I think as Christians, we have to place our faith in Christ and in the Bible, and not in our politics. Although we do want to be political, and we do want to be thinking about how our government is run. We don't want to be ignorant, but at the same time, we don't want to act as if this government, these politicians, they're going to solve our country's problems and they're going to make this a Christian nation. I don't think we should be thinking like that. I think our duties is to be wise and discerning and vote with wisdom. I think our duty is to be good witnesses, even when the candidate doesn't agree with what we agree with. I think we should still be advocating for biblical things, being compassionate to the poor and the lost and the immigrants, being arguing against and defending infants and babies from abortion, and all these things. I think it goes either or. But yeah, that's my answer to that question. I don't see any other questions, so I think this might be it. I'll give you guys like 1 minute, but so far I got no questions. But whether or not there's questions or not, we will have Zoom discussions afterwards. The meeting IDs are up here, but it's also in the link below. So join us for that. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll junior hires, I'll see you guys in our Zoom chat. All right. Let me check if there's any other questions. No other questions. All right. See you guys on Zoom.